Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Alfred Hitchcock look-alike contest.
I got the job because I look like him.
But why did I choose the Hitchcock of the Cold War? I thought it was sort of crucial, and also a lot of what, I don't know if you've seen the film, but the big metaphor in the film is also the birds, and for several reasons. But also the Cold War was crucial because television as a format became big through the Cold War, as a spectacle that was propagated as a sort of a fear industry, propagated through television. The early 60s sort of, and that's also the whole dialogue between Hitchcock and Hitchcock meeting on the set of The Birds, is that beginning of the 60s a lot of cinemas are closing down and Hollywood has to redefine itself against television. So when Hitchcock took on his television crew to shoot Psycho, it's because the cinema is a bit in crisis. So they're trying to rewrite the format. Panavision was also there because they wanted to draw people back to the cinema instead of being glued to the television set back at the home. So that's sort of a crucial juncture in cinema history, is sort of television. And it's true, Hitchcock took on all those formats, but you have also Hitchcock the television maker, and I thought it's sort of an interesting figure where very often with the 370 introductions, you have the Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and then it became 1 hour. Alfred Hitchcock Hour became so popular in 1963, became 1 hour, is that very often in his introduction he plays on the idea of the double. And it's because also television is sort of a double ganger of cinema. And I thought, wow, that's sort of an interesting plot to develop. And that's how things grew and fell into place. But also The Birds, it's filmed in 1962. You have the height of the Cold War in 1962, and it's also played out through television. The biggest television audience was 1961, 1962, 1963 with the presidential debate. It's the first presidential debate, instead of radio, became television. So politics moves on to television. Then you have the Cuban Missile Crisis was played out through television. The whole fear industry between East and West, and the whole ideological divide, the way the world was divided, was played out through television. And at the same time, 1963, when maybe American politics lost its innocence with murdering John F. Kennedy, the worldwide television audience was 1963. When the film The Birds came out, it was the biggest television audience worldwide ever. And sort of you see that the image culture becomes mature, and it's all around the moment of The Birds, and the birds attacking the home. It sort of became that idea of television culture invading the home. Television became a new family member, and it's sort of that fear culture becomes propagated in the household name directly. Because that's what Hitchcock said. Television brought murder back into the American home where it always belonged. It's sort of a joke as one of the introduction in these speeches. And it's literally like that. And it's sort of, I thought it was sort of interesting to take that as an analogy, because it's sort of the whole film is framed around the beginning of the 60s, but it's played out through something that is going on today. It's also how Hitchcock has been multiplied, and Hitchcock has become a clone, and it's a metaphor for the digital culture of today. It's YouTube culture and download culture, how that the web 2.0 became sort of a lookalike imitation culture, and how we all sort of measure that Hollywood icon or Hollywood culture or identity through the commercial has become so prevalent in mainstream media that images are so out there in the world that reality collapses under the image culture.
This is a special report on one of the most unusual diplomatic events in recent history.
Featuring on the one hand, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, the irrepressible and outspoken leader of communism. On the other, the Vice President of the United States, Richard Nixon, cast in the role of defender of capitalism and American foreign policy. Part of the unscheduled fireworks was recorded on videotape.
Yeah, it was weird when I made Dial History. Everybody said, why you make a film about hijacking? And I said, I don't know, I have to make it. But it was not a film about hijacking per se, it was also a film how those hijackings have been represented. So it was also the history of the media, and sort of trying to have a look and a deconstruction of television culture. Now with Double Take it's the same, But I don't know if it's a premonition of some things to come, but for sure the whole Iranian nuclear proliferation that was going on when we were editing, and it's still going on, is very much there. And that again is bullshit. It's sort of, during the first Iraq war, nobody knows that. It's an Italian filmmaker who made a documentary about it, is that the Americans used mini nukes. They used mini nuclear arms. And they were treading their feet with all the nuclear treaties. They are the ones to, first of all, Hiroshima and Nagasaki the Americans were the first one to use weapons of mass destruction. And then when the Iraq war happened, between Basra and the Iranian border, they used nuclear weapons. And what would you do if you lived in a house and your neighbor's house is being destroyed completely to the ground, let's say Iraq, and then your other neighbor, Afghanistan, is also being destroyed to the ground by somebody across the river? What would you do if your house is still standing there and they already thrown bombs in your garden? It's so fucked up. And then they say, okay, well, he's making bombs. But the biggest nuclear stockpile is in Israel. They have 80 nuclear, sort of, maybe more, we don't know. But officially they have 80 nuclear missiles. And they're talking about first strike, preemptive strike, and throwing bombs in Iran. And I think this is totally absurd, it's a totally absurd, upside down game, because they say, oh, Iran, but they should point the finger at themselves. When we talk about unknown known, when Zizek is so sharp to say, but look, Rumsfeld lost his job because he doesn't know what he knows, and it's sort of that fourth term is sort of where ideological points out the fact that the emperor doesn't have any clothes. It's so easy to point the finger, because weapons of mass destruction everybody knew. And then all this, when Bush had his State of the Union address, everybody claps their hands about, oh, if they want war, we're gonna give them war. But it's stupid. They totally rhetorically twist the game, and it's sort of completely lookalike politics. And sort of when that protagonist in the film, Ron Burrage, who's the lookalike Hitchcock, it's sort of the protagonist of the film. It points at the fact that we have become a lookalike culture. And that's maybe the premonition of that, actually, are we moving into a world where reality is totally being observed by a lookalike imitation image culture?
By an odd coincidence, we have a story about a man who decided to be someone other than himself.
People would say, oh, it's Ron. It's Ron Burrage. The one who looks like Hitchcock. Sometimes it's difficult to believe anyway. It's like looking in a mirror. You can never see yourself as others see you. Yeah, you get people do double takes and, what's happening?
The whole film, the story of the film was constructed through the editing. It's sort of, well, of course, there's all these codes, even the commercial, the coffee commercial, it sort of becomes a big protagonist in the film. But by changing the codes and trying to tell that story, through a fiction story as well of somebody meeting their double, was constructed through the editing, and we had all those layers. So that the political layer was one, the fiction story of Hitchcock meeting Hitchcock, which is based on the Borges story, written by Tom McCarthy, was another sort of layer. And then the interview with Ron Burrage, when we went to London and interviewed him, and the fact that we have all these coincidences, the fact that he's born on the same day, that he actually introduced the birds in Locarno, it's the 100th birthday on the August 13th, and it's his own 70th birthday. But while being really in the act of being Hitchcock, introducing the restored version of the birds, that was sort of another layer. And then he had the birds, it's the story of a film that sort of became also the story of the politics of that time, sort of became a metaphor for also telling that story. And it went back and forth. We had a weekend where we discussed, and I had sort of a rough cut of 2 hours, and we looked through all the images and the story. We sort of discussed that, and he said, that's sort of interesting, because Khrushchev and Nixon become sort of, on a metaphorical level, the same as Hitchcock versus Hitchcock trying to get rid of one another. It's sort of those two guys on a bigger political level trying to get rid of one another. And then we saw, that political sort of situation, we have to push that through the film as well. Sort of the dialogue between Tom and me became sort of Hitchcock talking to Hitchcock, became also me as the filmmaker and he as the novelist, sort of telling the story. We had sort of a similar thing of two doubles meeting one another, sort of that became a mirror of how we worked and how it became part of the film.
Oh, sorry.
And they say, you don't half look like Hitchcock. And I say, funny that.
Good evening. I'm Alfred Hitchcock.